The key turned with a gritty click, and the door gave way like a held breath finally released. Owen Hart stood on the threshold with road dust on his coat and a deed folded in his breast pocket, letting his eyes adjust from noon glare to the dim hush of an old house. He had imagined silence, echoes, the kind of emptiness that answers a man back. Instead, he heard a kettle ticking down on residual heat, the quiet rush of a draft under floorboards, and a small, unmistakable sound like a spoon settling in a cup. Someone was here. He didn't reach for his rifle. He didn't have to. It leaned in the wagon under the tarp with the seed sacks, and in that instant he realized what a fool's errand loneliness could be. You plan for wolves and weather, and you forget the simple surprise of another human breath. "Hello?" His voice vanished into the timbered hall and came back thinner. A shape moved at the far end of the parlor. A woman, tall and steady, emerged from the soft gloom with a hand on her lower back, and the other wrapped around a mug. She wasn't hiding. She looked at him like a person who has waited for the inevitable and found it, finally, on time. Dark hair braided tight, apron clean but threadbare, belly full and round beneath the apron ties. "You must be Mr. Hart," she said, calm as Sunday. "The kettle's off. There's water if you need it." Before he could shape a reply, another figure appeared from the doorway that led to the kitchen. Shorter, her cheeks freckled, the sleeves of her work shirt rolled, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. She carried a basket of washed greens and stopped when she saw him, the way deer halt, ready to run, unwilling to waste the step. Her hand went unconsciously to her abdomen, protective and familiar. A third voice drifted from the stairwell. "Is he here?" It was a whisper, but the kind that carries. A girl, no, not a girl, a woman younger than the other two, descended slowly, one hand on the banister, eyes wide and watchful. Her dress hung loose except where the fabric curved over a child not yet ready for daylight. She reached the last step and didn't come off it, as if the floorboards might change their minds. Owen found his mouth forming the only words that made sense. "I bought this place." The tall one nodded. "We know. We were hoping you'd be kind." Wind shouldered the house and rattled the loose sash in the north window. The room settled around the four of them. A man who had chased emptiness across 3 counties and found it already taken. 3 women who wore the future like a weight and a vow. Names came slowly, as names do when trust is expensive. The tall one was May Caldwell, a schoolteacher once, by the sound of her plain, precise words. The freckled one was Hazel Pike, who could make a kitchen hum with less than most people ruin with plenty. The youngest was Lark, just Lark, whose eyes held the habit of listening for footsteps before words. "How long?" Owen asked. May's glance touched the ceiling, the door, the kitchen clock. "Since the thaw." "That's months." "Some months are longer than others," Hazel said, her chin lifting a notch. Lark's hands were folded over her belly like she'd learned prayer late and clung to it. "We keep to ourselves. We fix what breaks. We don't ask for charity." It wasn't charity that worried him. It was the arithmetic of sleep and food and winter wood, now that the house wasn't empty. The deed in his pocket felt less like a guarantee and more like a promise he hadn't meant to make. "How'd you come by the key?" he asked. May set her mug down without looking at it. "Mr. Dowling left in a hurry after the first freeze. Said he was selling. Said we could mind the place till the paper changed hands. The paper changed hands." She let the fact sit between them. "We were hoping the new hand wouldn't turn us out fast." Hazel added, softer. "We're not staying forever, just until the babies." Owen had wanted this place because people didn't come here by accident. The creek ran honest, the pasture held, The cottonwoods gave shade that didn't ask for thanks. Mostly, he had wanted the quiet to be his. But the sight of 3 women breathing carefully through the fear of being told to go, he couldn't fit that into the same box as solitude. He took off his hat. It left a pale circle on his brow. "I didn't buy you," he said, and heard the clumsiness. I didn't come to send anyone into the road." Relief didn't show on their faces. It changed their shoulders, barely, like someone had put down a bucket. They gave him the tour like stewards, not thieves. The roof over the summer kitchen needed shoring where snow had chewed the shingles thin. Hazel had canned what August gave: peaches, tomatoes, a line of jars like stained glass along the pantry shelf. May had mended the fence along the south pasture with baling wire and patience. Lark had scrubbed the upstairs rooms until the old smoke smell retreated to the corners. They spoke with the quiet authority of people who save what they can, because there is no one else. "How far along?" he asked, without looking directly at their bellies, letting the question find its size in the air. May. 7 months, Hazel. 6. Lark, barely audible. 5. The numbers ticked into place like fence staples. They didn't trade stories right then. Those are earned after wood is stacked and a meal is eaten. Instead, Owen did something simple and irrevocable. He went back to the wagon, brought in the sack of flour, the coffee, 2 bolts of lamp wicks, and set them on the table. "Groceries don't care who opens them," he said, and Hazel's mouth made the shape of a smile before she could stop it. They worked without the clatter of orders. Owen unloaded lumber and leaned it by the back door. May held the ladder while he climbed to see the weak stretch of the summer kitchen roof. He felt the ladder steady under her grip, a trust shared sideways. Hazel sorted the pantry with the efficiency of a quartermaster. Lark folded linens in the parlor where the light was kindest, humming a tune with few notes and long spaces between. By late afternoon, the house smelled like onions taming in bacon grease and bread, thinking about rising. Hazel moved like she'd bargained with scarcity, and always gotten the better end. Owen chopped kindling just to keep his hands from needing words he didn't have yet. At dusk, the 4 of them ate at the table that had watched other hands, other seasons. There wasn't a prayer exactly, but there was a pause that did the same work. Between bites, Hazel admitted, "The midwife is 3 towns east, comes through when she can." May's gaze didn't leave her plate. "We've been making do with a tattered book and nerve." Lark said nothing, but her thumb rubbed circles on the wood, small and steady, like smoothing a splinter no one else could see. Owen remembered a winter night with no witness but the wind, a fever that took his younger brother in an hour flat, and how men can swing a hammer all their days and still be helpless when a body they love decides to leave. He put down his fork. "We'll need a better plan than luck." May's eyes met his. "We didn't ask you to." "I know." He wasn't offering charity. He was declaring an interest, in the house, in the future now lodged under its roof. "But if I own the rafters, I own what they shelter." Outside, the first stars pinned down the sky like nails in tin. Coyotes tuned up somewhere the other side of the creek. The house took Owen's measure, and then, by small degrees, accepted him. Later, lamp low, he unrolled his bedroll by the kitchen door, as if he were a hired hand on his own deed. The women disappeared like lanterns into their rooms. He listened to the building settle, to wind try each window, to the kettle cool. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate. Lark, hovering in the threshold with a folded blanket. "You forgot this," she whispered, offering him the wool. He took it, and in the passing she glanced at his hands, nicked, clean, a man familiar with effort. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and was gone, but Owen felt the shift. trust knitting its first stitch. Sleep came in pieces. Once, a quiet gasp upstairs corkscrewed through the floorboards. A different house would have let him pretend he didn't hear. This one didn't. He climbed the stairs in his stocking feet and found Hazel on the landing, a hand pressed to her side. "Just a pull," she said, embarrassed at being caught in pain. "Baby likes to remind me who's in charge." "Sit," he said, not because he was the kind of man who gave orders, but because he knew how stubborn people stand until they fall. He eased her down on the top stair. May appeared from the dark, with a cup of something that smelled like mint and memory, wrapped Hazel's hands around it, and the moment passed without requiring more than they had to give. In those small, unceremonious exchanges, a new arithmetic began. Flour divided by 4, roof mended against 2 storms instead of 1, fear shared until it weighed less than it looked. Owen realized, as he lay back on his bedroll, that the quiet he had purchased wasn't gone. It had changed shape. It sounded like water in pipes that weren't there, like breath and floorboards, and the future rolling over in its sleep. Before dawn, he was up, boots on, breath fogging in the kitchen. He left a slate on the table, the stub of chalk beside it. On the slate, he drew 3 boxes and wrote next to them: midwife, woodpile, fence. Under that, a 4th box: names. When the women came down one by one to the smell of coffee and cold apples, May tapped the last word with a fingertip. "We didn't tell you the rest," she said. "You will," he replied. "When you're ready." Hazel smiled into her cup. Lark watched the boxes like they were steps across a river. By sunup, Owen had already turned the wagon east in his head and measured the miles, the road to the midwife, the bridges out, the way spring rain lays traps in low ground. He was not the man who rode away from trouble anymore. The deed in his pocket wasn't paper. It was proof. Of anchor, of answer. When he stepped onto the porch with his hat and the morning, he glanced back and saw what he hadn't expected on the first day. 3 women framed in the doorway of a house that wasn't empty and didn't want to be. May's chin was up. Hazel's hands were busy with a dish that didn't need washing. Lark's fingers were laced, white at the knuckles, but she nodded at him as if to say, "Go," and also, "Come back." He tipped his hat. "I'll bring help." "Bring yourself back first," May said, practical even with hope showing at the edge of her voice. He crossed the yard, climbed to the wagon seat, and gathered the reins. The creek talked to the morning like it always had. The cottonwoods raised their hands to a sky that hadn't chosen sides. Owen Hart flicked the lines and headed toward town, into a day that felt like a door. The wagon wheels struck ruts still soft from last week's storm, lurching with the kind of rhythm that makes a man talk to his horse just to keep from thinking too much. Owen Hart had planned a solitary trip into town for supplies. Nails, salt, maybe tobacco if the price didn't cut him too deep. Now every mile carried the weight of 3 lives that weren't his, and 3 unborn that already were. The prairie morning lay flat and endless, but his mind held walls. He saw May's steady eyes, Hazel's quiet strength, Lark's thin fingers clutching a stair rail. He had intended to live with silence. Now silence had faces, names, and heartbeats he hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. At the first rise, he stopped to water the horse. The land stretched wide, scrub low and shimmering, the horizon broken only by cottonwood clusters and the faint line of a stage road. He had never felt more exposed, yet the thought of the farmhouse behind him filled with waiting, with breath and small sounds, gave him something close to anchor. By noon, he reached the outskirts of town. A few shops leaned into the main street, their fronts painted against time but losing anyway. He pulled up at the general store. "Fletcher Knox," A man who weighed every handshake against his ledger looked up from unloading crates. "You bought Dowling's place," Fletcher said, no greeting. Owen nodded, tying the reins. "Thought you'd prefer being alone." "Still might," Owen answered. "But I need a midwife. East County, you know her?" Fletcher's brows rose. "Midwife? Didn't figure you the type to need one." "I need names, not figuring." The merchant spat dust from his lip. "You mean Elsie Calder. Lives 2 towns east near the river. Hard ride. She comes when she's called, but not free." "Nothing's free," Owen said. He gathered flour, lamp oil, seed packets, a new axe handle. While Fletcher wrapped twine around the bundle, a few townsfolk lingered near the porch, eyes sliding toward Owen like they'd heard already. Dowling had been talkative, and news traveled faster than wagons. One woman murmured to another, and he caught the word boarders. Another said women still there. He lifted his supplies without comment, loaded the wagon, and kept his eyes forward. Loneliness had been a shield. Now he was carrying something that looked like scandal. At the blacksmith's he asked about spare nails and hinges. The smith, a man named Cale with arms like iron beams, leaned on his hammer. "Heard you've got company up there. 3 of 'em, ain't it? Expectin' 2. Owen kept his tone level. "House came with more than rafters." Cale grunted a laugh. "You'll have a story whether you want it or not." Owen left with nails and a coil of wire. The sun was tipping west, and the miles home pressed long. He thought of the women again. May watching him with the sharp calm of a schoolteacher, Hazel's hand steady even when pain bent her side, Lark glancing toward him like she didn't trust her own voice yet. He rode until the prairie thinned to creek and pasture. The farmhouse showed itself plain against the sky, smoke trailing from the chimney. The sight settled his chest. He hadn't expected to miss a place so quickly. The horse slowed in the yard. Hazel was on the porch, apron dusted with flour, wiping her hands. May stood in the doorway, eyes narrowing against the low sun, watching like someone counting each hoofbeat for proof. And Lark. She lingered behind them, arms folded over her middle, gaze darting. But when she saw him lift his hand, she raised hers in answer. He carried the bundle inside, laid the flour and nails on the table. Hazel touched the sack like it was gold. May glanced at the coil of wire. "That'll hold the fence." "There's a woman east, name of Elsie Calder," Owen said. "Midwife. I'll ride for her when the time comes." May nodded once, as if the words had checked a box in her ledger. Hazel busied herself with jars, but her relief showed in the set of her shoulders. Lark's lips parted. No words, just a small sound, like breath finally let go. The night came down easy. Owen stacked wood by the hearth, listening to Hazel hum low while she kneaded bread. May marked a ledger with careful lines of ink. Lark sat by the window, tracing condensation with her fingertip. He thought of the road again. Dust, distance, and talk that carried. Let them talk. He hadn't bought a farm to impress a town. He had bought it for quiet. And quiet, he was learning, sometimes had more voices than he expected. When the lamps burned low, Owen unrolled his bedroll again near the door. May looked over once, as if to speak, but didn't. Hazel murmured goodnight. Lark lingered on the stairs, eyes down, then whispered, "Thank you." For what? For coming back. He wanted to say it wasn't thanks he needed, just sleep. But instead he tipped his head, let the silence hold the answer, and lay down with the weight of 3 lives breathing above him. Dawn came on like a match struck in a barn. Quick, orange, and hungry. Owen was up before it, watering the horse, checking the east fence where wire sagged between posts that had given up fighting weather. The land spoke in small ways. A rock rolled out of a furrow, a print sunk deep by the creek where deer came at night, the battered hinge on the smokehouse door that would not survive another wind. He made a list in his head, and in the margin of it kept the same 3 names. Back at the house, the first sound was Hazel's broom on the boards. The second was May's steady voice reciting figures: seed, salt, soap, as if saying the words could stretch them. Lark stood at the sink with sleeves rolled, her profile thin as a blade, watching light pry open the day. "Fence," Owen said, setting the coil of wire by the door. "We'll need that hinge too," May answered without looking. "If the smokehouse swings off in a wind, the meat's gone." He took a hammer, a pocket full of nails, and the wire. On his way out, he caught Hazel's hand braced on the table, knuckles white, and paused. "Just tired," she said, a little too quickly. He nodded and went to the fence. The work was clean and sure: dig, tamp, pull, staple, clip. Sweat rose fast, even in the cool. He liked the feel of strain traveling from wire to post to ground to bone. It made sense. While he worked, he thought about Elsie Calder, the miles to the river, the way a road lengthens when someone you care about is hurting at the end of it. By mid-morning, he'd pulled the sag out of 60 yards and rehung the smokehouse door with a hinge worth trusting. When he returned for water, Hazel was on the porch with a chair she'd hauled out herself, wiping her brow with the back of her wrist. May sat beside her, ledger closed, gaze lifted past the yard to the road, as if waiting for something she hadn't ordered but had calculated anyway. Lark was trimming ragged cloth into neat squares. They all looked up the same instant. Dust on the road. Not wind. Riders. 2 men, their shadows long and narrow, with the sit of people who came to deliver choices you didn't want. They rode into the yard like it belonged to them, and dismounted before their dust settled. Owen set his cup down, wiped his hands, and stepped off the porch. "Morning," the older one said. He had a badge pinned low, not polished, the sort a man forgets he's wearing because the habit means more than the shine. "Deputy Crane, this here's Pike. We're out of the county office." May's back straightened. Hazel's hand slipped to her belly. Lark went still as a bird in long grass. "Dowling's farm," Crane went on, reading not the house but the people. "And you're the man who bought it." "I am." "You sign for the taxes due?" He held out a folded paper. Official ink bled at the edges where someone had pressed too hard. "Back sums? 2 years, plus penalties. County says collect or attach assets." Owen took the paper and read. The numbers were not small. "Dowling sold in a hurry," Crane said. "Left holes. The county doesn't ride after sellers who don't want finding. We ride toward who's standing still." "Which is me," Owen said. "Which is you," Crane agreed, not unkind. His eyes flicked toward the porch. "And you've got dependents." "We're boarders," May said, voice even. "We keep the house and pay in work." Crane nodded once, a man tucking information into a box he might reopen later. Pike didn't nod. He watched Lark with a slant smile that didn't fit his face. Owen folded the paper. "What's the worst of it?" "Lion first. Auction later if the ledger stays red." Crane shifted, boot creaking. "I'm not here to toss any mother on the road. I am here to write that I told you what the county intends." "Write that you told me," Owen said. "Then write that I said I won't let them be moved." "That second part's not how this works," Pike put in, amused. "Paper moves people just fine." Owen looked at him until the smile cooled, then back at Crane. "I'll make it right." "When?" Crane asked. "Before harvest." He didn't know yet how, only that there were things he could sell, and things inside him that would not let those women sleep one night under open sky because a man ran from his debts. Crane weighed him. "There's a mark I believe and a mark I don't." I'll put you under the first. He tore a stub from his pad, signed, and tucked it into Owen's folded paper. You see me again in 30 days if it's still bad. They mounted. Pike tipped 2 fingers at Lark like a habit he thought was charm, and rode out under Crane's shadow. When the dust settled, May exhaled for the first time. You didn't ask us, she said, not angry, a fact put on the table to be examined. I didn't have the time, Owen answered. Another fact. Hazel looked at the paper. How much? Too much, he said. Not enough to break us if we're smart. We've been smart a long time, May said. We can keep at it. Smarter, he answered. They went to work. That was the use of worry on a farm. It drove hands to tasks that improved what could be improved. Owen cleaned the spring head and dug the channel deeper where silt had slowed it. May inventoried the root cellar, set aside what could be traded. Hazel sketched rows for a second garden closer to the creek, where water would run without carrying. Lark, silent most days, stitched and stitched until a neat tower of diapers and cloths rose like a pale fortress on the table. By late day, the heat hit hard. Hazel's humming stopped. She leaned against the table and grabbed its edge. The look on her face pulled the world tight. May was moving before Owen spoke. Chair, she said, and Owen brought it. Hazel sat, jaw hard, breath quick and shallow. Early? He asked. Not yet, May answered, eyes already measuring the space between pain and rest. But close enough to make a midwife a good idea. I'll ride, Owen said. Hazel shook her head. It'll pass. It might, May said, and it might not. And the river house is a long road even when it does. Owen saddled the bay with hands that knew the work. He filled a canteen, slipped bread and jerky into a pouch, and tied his rain slicker behind the saddle, even though the sky was clear. Roads have their own weather. When he swung up, the 3 of them were on the porch. Lark had one palm on a post, small hand against rough wood. May had Hazel's hand in hers. I'll be back before dark if I can, he said. You'll be back when the road gives you up, May said, practical as always. Go. He rode east. The prairie opened, then narrowed at the cottonwoods where the creek braided and unbraided itself. He kept the horse light and steady, saving speed for later. The sun slid, and with it his shadow shortened to a stub at the horse's shoulder. He passed a wagon headed west, a man and woman with a baby asleep under a hat. The man lifted 2 fingers from the reins. Owen returned the same, neither wasting words the wind would steal. At the river the land reared into bluffs, cottonwoods crowding the banks. The Calder place sat where the bend made backwater, low roof under big trees, smoke thin and straight. A woman was hauling a net from the shallows with her skirts pinned, legs in the current. She looked up the moment the horse hit gravel. Elsie Calder? Owen called. Depends who's asking, she said, not slowing. She had the voice of someone people listened to because they discovered too late they hadn't. Owen Hart. 3 women at Dowling's old place. One's close. I need you. She heaved the net, fish flashing, and planted a boot in the mud. Close like today? Close like the road between now and tomorrow won't forgive me if I'm wrong. She studied his face, measuring decision, fear, and the edges of both. Then she shrugged into a dry skirt she had hung on a pegged branch, tossed the fish into a tub, and tied her hair back with the same rope she used on the net. My satchel's by the door, she said. You carry it. I'll bring tinctures. We'll take my mare. She's faster on clay. He reached for the leather bag and felt its weight. Iron, linen, glass. The quiet tools that brought life through tight places. Behind the house, a boy of about 10 appeared, face damp from the river, and snagged the mare's halter without a word. He had his mother's economy. "Tell your uncle to mind the nets," Elsie said. "And if the water rises, pull the barrels higher." The boy nodded once. Owen recognized the language of families that didn't waste voice. They rode hard, the mare cutting the trail like she'd been bred from wind, Owen's bay stretching to keep in her dust. Shadows reached long and fast across the flats. Above them, hawks drew slow circles, hunting. Elsie didn't talk beyond what mattered. How far, how many, how long since the last pain? Owen answered what he could and swallowed what he couldn't. They hit his yard at last light. May was waiting on the porch, lamp already lit, its glow laying honey across the boards. Hazel sat with her head tipped back, jaw set. Lark stood behind them, both hands on the doorframe as if holding the house up with her small bones. Elsie was on the ground before the horses stopped. "Which one?" "Hazel," May said, and in that one word gave the midwife two more, strong and afraid. "Boil water," Elsie said. "Clean linens. Clear the table or the bed, whichever is closest to a stove. You," she pointed at Owen, "move anything that isn't a woman or a thing I can't do without." He moved. May moved faster. Lark flitted ahead of them, small and exact, fetching what was named before the sentence finished. Hazel rode another wave, and, when it dropped her, met Owen's eyes and smiled like a woman who'd picked up a heavy box and found she could carry it. Night rose, and with it the sounds a house makes when it waits, the tick of cooling iron, the small groan of a board under a shifting foot, the hush before a storm finds your roof. Owen stoked the stove until it roared, then cut it back, then stoked it again. He wasn't needed and he was necessary. Two truths held at once. When Elsie's voice came through the door, it was steady and close. "We've time yet," she called. "Not tonight, I think. But we don't ride the river again until the work is done." Owen let out a breath he hadn't owned for hours. He stepped onto the porch and sat on the top stair. The sky was full and black, stars pressed hard into it. Somewhere down by the creek, a coyote called once and gave up. The farm lay around him not as a boundary, but as a promise. Inside, 3 women breathed under the same roof. At the table, a ledger lay closed. On the peg by the door hung a midwife's satchel, like a new hinge on an old house. He thought he had bought quiet. What he'd purchased was weight. He found he didn't mind carrying it. The days that followed carried a rhythm that was new but steady. Morning broke with May at the stove, measuring out portions so nothing went to waste. Hazel moved slower now, resting more often, but her laugh began to return in small bursts when the others weren't watching. Lark followed Owen like a shadow, learning to mend fence, to measure seed, to ride the bay with reins light in her small hands. The farm no longer felt like something Owen had bought. It felt like something he had been drafted into, stitched into its seams by 3 women and the weight they carried. He found himself listening for their voices when he worked the fields, for the scrape of Hazel's chair, for the faint hum May let slip when she forgot to guard it. Even the quiet felt different. It wasn't loneliness now. It was the sound of lives moving together. One afternoon, dust rose again on the road. This time it wasn't lawmen. It was a wagon drawn by a sway-backed mule, piled with barrels, and a man hunched over the reins. Traders. Owen met them at the gate, coins in his pocket and the women behind him, watching. "What do you trade?" the man asked. "Eggs, milk, a little beef, cloth." May stepped forward, ledger in hand, every word sharp as an edge. The man studied her, then nodded. "Show me." By dusk, the wagon rolled away lighter than it came. In its place, the house held flour, nails, and a hinge to replace the last rotten one. The ledger held a mark showing credit, small but solid. The women's eyes held something Owen hadn't seen since he arrived. hope that reached past the next sunrise. That night, after the meal, Hazel dozed by the stove. May closed her ledger, and Lark leaned against Owen's shoulder without a word. He looked down at her. Small, quiet, already carrying more than most grown men, and felt something shift in him. A weight, yes, but one he wanted. When May caught his eye, she didn't speak. She didn't have to. In that silence, Owen understood. This farm was no longer just his fight. It belonged to all of them, bound not by law or paper, but by the choice to stand together. He had bought land for solitude. What he found was a family. And though debts still loomed, and birth still waited, and storms would surely come, Owen knew he would not face them alone. The prairie night settled over the farm, stars scattered wide. Inside, 3 women rested under the same roof, and one man sat guard with a heart that, for the first time in years, felt full.